Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, welcome to the concluding panel, which is a special panel because it's the panel of the panels, the ultimate panel, welcoming the chairs of the individual panels that will, as we have heard, continue this afternoon. And we've got only 1 hour time. And you see this large panel, adequate to a large conference. So I need to reduce myself to the minimum possible to let the expert of the various panels speak and explain the results of their panels so far. To begin with, I would like to invite Mr. Weitzman to give some introductory reflections on possible strategies and measures to be taken. Mr. Weitzman.
Thank you. I will be hopefully very, very brief. I was struck as we were talking, as everybody was talking about the anguish that I really heard from speakers, after speaker, not just from Austrians, but from everyone else who felt, in a sense, the necessity for translating their words into actions. My remarks are going to be based on the policy of the catalog of policy recommendations that you've heard so much about, and I want to just take a few minutes to very briefly describe what we intend to do with that, but also to tell you that in our view, that is one of the mechanisms in which your words, both written and spoken, can be translated into action. That is, in a sense, the goal of this conference in many ways, and this is the opportunity to enact that. So first of all, it is not going to be a long book or a very large, overwhelming book. It is going to be a short publication that is aimed at policymakers. It is not limited to policymakers only in the field of politics, but we will attempt to put it in the hands of people in the media, in education, in law, in law enforcement, in theology, and so on, who have the ability to use it to make an impact on the ground. So it is very directive in that regard. We are looking for contributions, both original, many great contributions were heard in the prior sessions as well, but we're also looking for people who can give us and help us with good practices, examples of good practices that we can include, links to other recommendations that are already in action, as well as case studies that we can adopt and cite as well. So it is going to be a very hands-on, practical document, but it can only be as good as your contributions can make it. So if there's one last message that I will give you before I turn the mic back over, is to please take the words that you've heard here, your own words, your own ideas. It doesn't matter about disciplines, it's going to be interdisciplinary, cross-cutting, to apply that in a very practical way, to submit those recommendations, there still is time to it, and to join and participate in the effort to really take the words that we have spoken and that we have listened and heard and to translate them into, hopefully, recommendations that will achieve a goal of action on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weitzman. Now, may I ask you to, all panelists, all panel chairs actually, to kind of give a 2-minute summary of the results that your panels were able to achieve during these days. In addition to that, and in addition to the introductory reflections and to the measures Mr. Weitzman just explained, I will throw a few keywords onto the table, keywords that we have been collecting during the previous days among all of us, because time-wise it is not possible to include and to start an open debate in such a large room with such brief time. So, the keywords are the following. Reflections on cultural memory, prejudice research, consideration of economic inequality, and finally, what was raised by Mr. Levy in the opening speech, the question whether it is at all possible to end anti-Semitism or whether it is only possible to fight it. May I ask you, Professor Porat, to start our circle, and then may I ask anybody who wants to continue to immediately continue so that we don't lose time with my words.
Okay. Okay. So what did you say, 2 minutes? Okay. Okay. I'll try my best. Thank you. Well, that's quite a job for a chairperson. Our panel is titled Contemporary History, which means the contemporary ongoing anti-Semitism. It has 12 participants. 4 spoke on Tuesday, 4 on Wednesday, and 4 are about to speak today from 2:30 to 4:30, and then a debate. You are all invited to hear. Are there any results already? This is, I understand your question. Yes, I cannot in the 1 minute and a half left for me mention the 8 of them that have already spoken, but there were certainly a number of ideas that could be developed into a policy. For instance, Dr. Shimon Samuels suggested monitoring and going to book fairs, especially in the Arab world, book fairs that have connections to the main one in Frankfurt, and to try to see there books with anti-Semitic material and an attempt to take them off. Then there was, he had a suggestion regarding exhibitions, because the exhibition that it wasn't UNESCO's initiative, it was a Jewish initiative to have an exhibition called Land, People, Book, Land. And it's a successful one, and exhibitions that can reach to the public and explain and show are also a possibility. Then we had a debate about the German report, the German federal report on anti-Semitism that was issued by a special committee that was appointed in Germany. There was a debate pro the report and a criticism of the report, but there certainly came out a recommendation or an idea that instead of just throwing accusations against the newcomers to Europe, the immigrants, that they are an automatic source of anti-Semitism, to have it really checked and analyzed and surveyed, and only then come to conclusion whether we have there a source of anti-Semitism. Do I have still half a minute? Half a minute? Okay, I'm sorry about those that I'm not mentioning. These two the ladies who debated it were Dr. Juliane Wetzel and Deidre Berger. I'll give an example, not from our panels now, but from what I heard today. And since our mind, because of Armin Lange, our mind is geared to find policies all the time, there was an interesting mentioning by a lady, I'm not sure I see her, regarding the Christian content of some of the material that Frank Stern has so ably showed us. And indeed, I thought that we do have the paper, the letter that we got from the Pope. Could we take the letter of the Pope and make use of it to have an impact on the Catholic Church in Austria, which is certainly one to which part of the right strongly belongs, and to try to work through that. So my 2 minutes are over. I gave only 3 examples, but you can understand. And again, I invite everyone to the continuation, our panel. That's it. Good luck to everyone.
Martin Rothgang, I just would like to highlight one point from the pedagogy panel. It is very important to formulate policies and measurements. But there is one critical point. If you look at curricula, at all the goals in curricula, and what pupils really know after they leave the school, there is a big gap in between. There is a lot of research, for example, in physical education about force and how to teach it effectively. But when I looked for scholars for our panel, I saw there is a big lack about empirical research, what measurements are really effective against anti-Semitism. And it's much more difficult to teach it because force is not a prejudice somehow. But anti-Semitism is a prejudice, and it's very difficult to teach against prejudices. Sometimes you have a big goal, but it might be that you achieve the opposite you would like to achieve. So it's just one comment. We would need much more empirical research, what is really effective at schools and so on to combat anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Benjamin Isaac, chair of the ancient panel, Anti-Semitism in Greco-Roman Antiquity, which is a bit of a paradox because I can't summarize it because it hasn't taken place yet. But there's also good news. We've solved the problem. The ancient Greeks and Romans won't trouble us anymore. The Emperor Titus will not cause harm to any Jew. But now if you want me to say something in earnest, well, that's not easy because there is disagreement, as there should be, between academics. There's Eric Grun here, and we usually cheerfully and firmly disagree on essentials. But I think there's one point that can be made here, and that is the crucial difference that one observes in antiquity when Christianity takes over. That has meant a change, and it meant a continuing change. And for all of those who want to know more about this, come to our panel this afternoon and you'll be instructed. Thank you.
I think can you hear me? I think it's very useful to speak briefly about the panels that have been on biblical studies, Judaism and Christianity, because they're very much in conversation with what we've already heard. In particular, the question of how Christianity transforms things is related to this larger question of cultural memory and the shared texts, and shared here is an inappropriate word, the texts that are held in common in quite different ways. And one of the things that we found in several conversations is that there's a lot of ignorance around how texts have meaning in particular and different communities. And we've talked about a very practical move of trying to create introductory books, perhaps for young people, that allow them to ask, how do particular biblical texts convey meaning in a Jewish context or in a Christian context? And how, in particular, might Christian students understand anti-Semitic texts from the New Testament? So those are some of the questions that we brought forward.
I thought that it might be a good idea for me to stick in my comment at this point, although we've had one of our panels on Judaic studies and anti-Semitism, still to hear another one, but there are some observations that may fit into some of this discussion. And I don't have a second hand on my watch, so we'll have to have someone else tell me when to be quiet. But the point that I want to make in general is two things, which is that if anything, the fact that anti-Semitism can influence Judaic studies. The mic has gone off. No, you have to. It's on? Okay. If anything that somebody might be surprised at, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, that anti-Semitism can even influence the way we understand Judaic studies, because various people have written about this field, as they have about biblical studies, who actually are taking an anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic point of view in doing so. And that's the first thing which I think we see in the common studies. I, of course, read the abstracts of the material that's coming this afternoon, so at least I know something about it. The second major thing that I think emerges from some of our presentations is that if one cuts off to take your term, cultural memory, that is found in aspects of Christianity and Islam from the discussion, and then tries to deal with modern anti-Semitism as if it's just some kind of modern thing, one misses, and we saw this in a lot of papers today, one misses its way in which these things filter through into it, even in environments in which you don't expect to see it. And that's one of the points that came out. And I think that one of the things that our session indicates, and I know that there's much more going on here about Islam, but in terms of the Arab world, the field of Judaic studies is an excellent way, as it is in many other places, to push good relations between Jews, Judaism, and other groups. And we have to know that that's even true. This came out in our sessions in the Arab world. And another sort of more general point is that this actually is my own point of view, something I mentioned at the beginning, but I think it emerges from some of the stuff that we've heard, is just the need for much greater self-awareness and for scholars to be trained in where ideas come from and what comes with those ideas, so that when ideas are being discussed, you don't have a situation in which a student is being, in a certain sense, infected with a potential prejudice without anyone even pointing out what may lie in or behind these points of view. And the general summary statement that I think is going to emerge from when we complete our work this afternoon is that Judaic studies is part of the solution, but believe it or not, there are even some problems there of effects of anti-Semitism on the way certain things are conceived and written about by some people. So thank you.
Okay, let me just first summarize the media, journalism, and visual cultures panel. We had speakers from Israel, from the United States, from Germany, from Austria, and from Slovenia. And differences and similarities, of course, popped up. Like in Austria and Slovenia, anti-Semites, right-wing extremists are in the government, and some statements and publications seem to be politically legitimized, something we experience right now here in Austria, although the situation is completely different. From the scholar Yvonne Kozlowski from Haifa, we learned a lot about Syrian television and how Syrian television in the last 15 years has depicted Jewish characters, moving from very negative images to seemingly philo-Semitic images. So we learn a lot about more differentiated propaganda from Arab countries concerning Israel and Jews. The common denominator, not mentioning what has been said by the scholar from Germany or Austria, what I did today, also was telling you today, was that the power of the visual images, films, comics is immense, and that we experience a process of constant modernization of old stereotypes. So very often we should be careful to term something new anti-Semitism, because the content is old. The blood metaphor is old. The structure, the form can be new, modernized. And this is a challenge for us, because then we have to think how we counter. And we have to go beyond just countering. If I think about poster campaign by the BDS or other anti-Semitic and racist movements, we are always responding. And if I think about Austria, what we need is an active, open visual campaign about Israel today. We are always reacting to something while we need to be more offensive. So we should think, if we see other stuff, also in the media, in the internet, okay, so let's do something different. Not just answering, responding, being the defensive, we heard this today, but to become offensive, to be provocative, to show there's something else. The Jewish world has to offer something. Israel has to offer something. And we are not just defending Israel, but we are propagating the cause of Israel, because there is no other Jewish state. I think that we have to shift in our way how to deal in the media, in social education, in political education. There are no, let's say, comics to approach the young generation in the United States and France. You can find all kinds of of comics with Jewish issues. You can't find it in Austria. So we have a responsibility to rethink what we can do on the spot, on location. Not just in global terms, and here in Austria, the Dutch people have to think what to do there, or in England, one has to be contextualized in everything that's related to combating anti-Semitism.
Okay, since there were already few references, sorry.
Please go ahead.
Since there were few references to Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism, I feel that I have at this point to intervene. We held two panels, one which dealt with the early period of Islam and the Jewish-Muslim encounter, and the medieval times. We pointed, of course, to the texts, the Islamic texts, which include, of course, very negative stereotypes and approach towards Jews. But on the other hand, there are other verses and references to the Jews which are much more positive, which nowadays, unfortunately, they are in the dark. And we believe that these are the verses which we have to somehow bring back to the awareness of Muslims, especially in the West. I must say that we are not, our conclusions we are not very pessimistic as to the end of anti-Semitism. However, we really drew some encouragement from the self-criticism of Arab and Muslim societies, which include also in it references to anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. And in this sense, we thought that we should try to engage with those Muslims and with those Arabs. We cannot change anything, and we do not have a leverage on those states. However, I think that the situation in the Middle East today is shifting and changing, and perhaps we can find ways to silently, in contrast to the very aggressive approach, to reach out to the new trends in those regimes and to bring about a kind of change. There are, in the second part of this, the second panel dealt with modern times, and there we identified two different, I would say, entities of Muslims. Those, of course, in Arab countries, and Muslims in the West, which are a different problem and can be dealt differently. So we believe in encounters between Jews and Muslims and interfaith dialogues. Just recently, and also to raise some kind of awareness to the kind of Muslim-Jewish relations and Jewish communities' life in Arab lands. The picture was not as dark as it is being portrayed nowadays, and again, I think that we have to emphasize the bright sides of these encounters, which are really somehow overshadowed by the Islamists' approach, especially.
Like Ben Isaac, I can't summarize my panel because it hasn't taken place yet, though I urge you all to come this afternoon. I'm an historian and not a policymaker, so I don't feel completely confident in offering various policy statements. But as an historian,
Eric, can you put the mic closer?
Sure. As an historian, we are all to one way or another in the same business. We are teachers, we are educators, we deal with the young, we are trying to transmit to them whatever experience we have gained over the years. And let me give you an example of how education can become, education of this sort can become somewhat skewed. At Berkeley, and this is by no means a unique phenomenon, there's a course on Jewish history which covers the Jews from antiquity to the present. It's been on the books for some time. The enrollment is consistently low. At the same time, there is a course on the Holocaust. There are never enough seats for that. Students are always clamoring for this. I have no objection to that, of course, but the imbalance is troubling. Not just in terms of the enrollments in classes, but in terms of the focus of attention. We do not want Jewish history to be summed up in the Holocaust. We do not want the Jewish experience over the years to be characterized strictly by the horrific example of the Holocaust. Now, this conference, obviously, as its purpose being to combat anti-Semitism, it is perfectly plausible and reasonable to focus on that particular issue. But it always runs the risk of reducing the Jewish experience to the victimization. This is a long story, we are all familiar with it. And I noticed, for example, in several papers, which are admirable papers, I'm not criticizing them, I've learned an enormous amount in the last 3 or 4 days. But on several different occasions, people have said anti-Semitism is always with us. From the beginning to now, from antiquity to the present. And that, in a way, I mean, from an historian's point of view, you run the risk of looking for something, and of course you will find it. If you look in antiquity for anti-Semitism, you will find it. It does not follow that that is the sum of the Jewish experience in antiquity or in any other period. I can only speak with some reasonable confidence about antiquity. It runs the hazard of distortion, of finding what you are looking for, of having an agenda to begin with and fulfilling that agenda, which, from a historian's point of view, can compromise the integrity of the profession. So without in any way criticizing the value of this conference, I think it needs to be borne in mind that there is more to the experience of Jews over the centuries than just the negative. We do not want to, I at least do not want to revive what used to be called the lachrymose version of Jewish history. There are lachrymose periods, to be sure, but there's much else. And in terms of educating the young, I think it's very important to stress in many ways the contributions of the Jews, the positive values that they have brought to every society in which they've taken part. Let's not lose sight of that and plunge it all into the Holocaust.
Yes. May I? Thank you. My name is Aleksandra Gliszczyńska-Grawias, and I have a great honor of serving as a chair to the jurisprudence, so legal panels of this conference. We had the first panel yesterday. We are having the second one today, 2:30. I would like to invite everyone to join us because we are having fascinating discussions during the legal panels that may not sound or appear as fascinating as this is law, but law can be a fascinating subject too, I can assure you of that. Let me start by saying that in 2010 I attended another great conference on anti-Semitism. It was a conference organized at Yale University, and I had a chance to listen to Professor Ruth Wiese, and she gave a great lecture, and the title of the lecture was, and I quote, "What are we going to do with anti-Semitism? No, seriously, what?" And yesterday during our panel, our legal panel, I have the impression that we searched for the answers to this question, seriously, what? And we considered, first of all, if the law should and can be perceived as a useful, effective tool in this whole catalog of measures used to fight anti-Semitism. And we agreed that, that for sure, yes, but it should be taken seriously. Again, seriously is a key word here. So we should also demand from law enforcement agents, from the judges, prosecutors, especially in this European system of human rights protection, to use the law against those that are inciting to hatred, that are inciting to genocide, and that they also should take their obligations to act with the tools of law seriously. But we also discussed the question of if law can become a dangerous tool used against those who fight anti-Semitism, against the State of Israel, as is the case at the United Nations very often, and its resolutions of particular bodies of the UN. We also mentioned, or I mentioned, the issue of the new Polish law, new bill, that I'm sure you all have heard of. And this is exactly an example of how law can become a dangerous tool of introducing a very particular narrative. In this case, in the case of the Polish law, a narrative that introduces Poles only as, or presents Poles only as victims of others or saviors of others, and never perpetrators or former atrocities. And this narrative is not looking for the answers to the question of what happened to all those Jews during the war and after the war that managed to survive German genocide, but still didn't manage to survive in Poland. This narrative is not looking for the answer to the question, where are they? So it manifests, it proves that law can be used also by those who are not that eager to fight anti-Semitism. What's more, the law can be used to spread anti-Semitism and to provoke anti-Semitism, as unfortunately it happened in Poland. And I'm witnessing an enormous rise of anti-Semitism in my home country, which is heartbreaking. But there are other tools of law with which we can counteract these tendencies. And I hope that today we will continue the discussion on how to use legal tools in the most effective way. Thank you.
So Stefan Gregert, I co-chaired together with Karin Stöckner two panels on political studies. I just tried in 25 minutes to summarize some of the crucial points. So I just tried to summarize some of the crucial points in 25 minutes, so I'm not able to do it in 2 minutes. I just want to pick one point. I'm pretty sure a lot of you heard about this short story from Woody Allen. He once went to a cocktail party in New York, and one of his friends, a scholar, a left liberal Jewish scholar, I think, approaches him and tells him very enthusiastically, "I just finished my new essay against anti-Semitism." And the answer of Woody Allen is, "Well, I prefer baseball bats." And the reason why I tell you that is not because I want to somehow promote anti-intellectual resentment. Of course, we need to continue to write essays against anti-Semitism. I also don't want to promote some glorification of violence. I just want to make clear the character of anti-Semitism again. It's not just a threat, it's a deadly threat. And I want to make it clear by referring to Hezbollah. I'm very grateful to Irving Kotler that he makes this point very clear. The Hezbollah is an old-fashioned anti-Semitic organization which promotes openly Jew hatred, and it also promotes this so-called new anti-Semitism. And that's a problem in itself. But they are not only anti-Semites, they are anti-Semites who are heavily armed. They are armed with more than 130,000 rockets, missiles, that are aiming at Israel, that can reach almost every point in Israel. That is a deadly threat, and at some point, I'm very much afraid, or actually, unfortunately, I'm quite sure, there will be a major conflict, because this situation is not acceptable for Israel. And this is not some kind of, I don't know, right-wing warmongering. You can speak to almost everybody in Israel. You can read in Haaretz, in a more or less left-wing newspaper, that people are criticizing the Netanyahu government for everything, for corruption and cigars and this and that, but also, which is my point, they're also criticizing the Netanyahu government for watching a situation where it was possible that the Hezbollah was able to get these 130,000 rockets. That's left-wing criticism in Israel today. So almost everybody in Israel expects that at some point there will be a major war, and we should actually prepare for it. Here in this audience, I think we don't have really to tell you that Hezbollah and their puppet masters from Iran are openly anti-Semitic and they want to destroy Israel, but a lot of people in Europe simply don't believe in it, or they don't know it. So let's start today, or at least tomorrow, go out and make clear the character of the Hezbollah. We need somehow to prepare the European audience that at some point the Israelis will be forced to act against this deadly, lethal anti-Semitic threat. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, geht's ja. No? Yes, geht's. I am the chair of modern history, and in contrast to Woody Allen, I prefer knives like in Inglourious Bastards to mark anti-Semites. And yes, we should do this also here with our fraternities. We like things in the face. We talked a lot about actual policies, measures, and we came to the conclusion that first we have to strengthen and support education, not only Holocaust education, but education at all, to bring more enlightenment, etc., to the youth, and not to cut the money for education. The second thing, and it was the most important thing in our discussions, was that anti-Semitism is not the problem of the Jews, it's the problem of the societies. And they should point out what anti-Semitism is and not tolerate it in the framement of their societies. And it's not the problem of the Jews or the Jewish communities, but it's always the problem of the Jews and the Jewish communities and not of the governments. And another thing was to develop a better, let's say it, enlightened censorship against campaigns, against election campaigns. We saw this morning with anti-Semitic slurs and phrases against comic books who were in each house in Vienna by the FPÖ and so on. And not tolerate this kind of comics or phrases during the whole year. But how can we fight against those phrases when the composer of those phrases is now a minister of the government? And so it's a very difficult task we have here. And we should, and this was the last thing from our groups, we should on the one side, we should join groups and bring more people together in this fight. And the other thing is also not only joining groups, but to stand up against those people. Thank you.
Okay, Monika Schwarz-Friesel. My panel, Antisemitism on the Internet, is still going on, so I wouldn't like to draw conclusions, just two very general remarks. First, anti-Semitism on the Internet is the same age-old Jew hatred as always, and the most dangerous part you will find not in the darknet, not at the edges of the extremists, but in mainstream. And this is the same that holds true for society in general. And second, it is my firm belief that if you want to combat or to stop or to prevent anti-Semitism in a really effective way, you have to admit, you have to understand that anti-Semitism is not a prejudice. It is a cultural category stored in collective memory. Thank you.
I'm one of the co-chairs of Bible and Christianity, and I want to add only one aspect. In theology, it is possible, we found out, not only to fight anti-Semitism, but also to develop a theology probably of normal relations, of a culture of respect, of relationships of respect between Christianity and the Jewish or Judaism. It would be possible. However, in the Protestant part of Christianity, we have the problem, we don't have a Pope and Rome, not one institution. So we developed an idea to found one institution to coordinate certain effects. Because if every scholar, or if the single scholars write their articles, so this would be of not much effect. But an institution which would be able to coordinate some effects in publication or developing good relationships between Christianity students and Jewish students, Christian students, this would perhaps a possibility. Thank you.
Friesel, Israel Studies. From the lectures in our panel and the lectures here arise several conclusions. The first one is that apparently we understand less what anti-Semitism is, his roots, his significance, than we did 30 or 40 years ago. And this, in my view, in our view, is due to two reasons. One is external and the other one is internal. The external one is that in the last 30 or 40 years, anti-Semitism underwent a development. In the long history of Jew hatred, we are faced actually now with a new phase, expression, development, and that caused confusion. And that's the external reason. The internal reason is that apparently we among ourselves are less clear-minded in the research what that means, what is happening now. I have the feeling that the influence of social sciences has been less than helpful in the understanding of what actual anti-Semitism is and what it means. Anti-Semitism is a dangerous being, biting one, and we have to confront it with all the means at our disposal, especially intellectual ones, and from that point of view, that conference was a very, very positive contribution. Thank you very much.
There's a proverb that says that even if a fool, if he's silent, will be considered wise. So I thought if I could sit on this panel without saying anything, that might help to improve my public image. But I also participate in the legal panel, and just to add a few things to what Alexandra said, I think some very good ideas were raised, and they're along the lines with what Professor Kotler shared about the importance of strengthening the human rights institutions and the organizations that are supposed to protect human rights. And when they start focusing obsessively on condemnation of Israel, everybody loses out. Giovanni Kerr on our panel talked about the importance of bringing Palestinian abuse of human rights by Hamas and the PA before the UN, which to help balance out the rhetoric there, and also just because we really care about the human rights of Palestinians and the way that they suffer abuse from the Islamist leaders. Eugene Kantorovich put together a very interesting booklet regarding the investment of companies in occupied territories around the world. And this was in response, of course, to the decision of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations a few months ago to send letters to around 200 multinational companies advising them to desist doing business in the disputed territories in Israel. And we talked about the same companies that are investing in West Sahara and in North Cyprus and in Crimea, and the importance of creating an equal standard there, which has the potential of actually squelching this initiative eventually. Alexandra discussed some ideas on challenging the new law in Poland, which we won't go into detail. And then Brooke Goldstein from the Lawfare Project discussed some of their initiatives and particularly some encouraging developments regarding specifically the refusal of certain airlines to allow Israelis to fly on them. And they had a victory this year regarding the Kuwaiti airline based on anti-discrimination laws. So those were some of the good ideas that I think were brought up in our panel, and we look forward to the continuation of our discussions.
I'm speaking here as the exception, meaning not being one of the members of academia here, and I'd like to say something very personal. I've been elected to the executive of the World Jewish Congress 20 years ago, and to the European Jewish Congress 20 years ago. And I've been on these executives practically all the last 20 years. And as a Jewish leader, we have been facing one major question in Europe over this time, and this is, do the Jews have a future in Europe? Many of my colleagues have tried to give an answer, but it is stuttering. We are not really able to give answers. So one of the ideas was to convene such a conference and to say the only way we have to answer the problem is, for example, by putting together intelligentsia, academia, and ask you guys, ladies and gentlemen, for answers to the question. Because if you speak to Jews in Europe today, the main problem for them is anti-Semitism and terror. The second problem for them is finding Jewish partners, and the third problem is third problem, which is jobs and where do I see my future. But there has been a constant migration of Jews out of Europe over the last decades, and Frau will come up with a survey by the end of this year. I can bet as much as you want that the percentage of Jews who say no to the question, do we have a future here, is growing dramatically. Now we can't sit idle and we can't just do nothing. And I'm very thankful and very proud to be part of a conference where such an illustrious round of academics and professors have gathered, and we are really looking forward to the results of this conference. Bernard Lévy said there's not going to be an end. He loves the exclamation mark. At least there's going to be an initiative, strategies, suggestions. And yes, we name the problem. And yes, we answer to the problem. And hopefully we will also counterattack. That were the 3 points he made. So, from the non-academic co-organizer, I'd like to express my gratitude and the pleasure I had to meet so many of you here and to listen to you and to see how things develop. And Mr. Kotler, anytime we listen to you, it's a pleasure. Like all the others, I'm quoting you, representing all of the people here. It is good to have people like you to come up with solutions, ideas, and answers to the question, because when I listen to my fellow Jewish politician, I'm not exactly proud of how they ignore the problem, or at least do not come up with the necessary answers. And I'm blaming myself, I'm not blaming anybody else. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you to all of you. It is now my pleasure and honor to conclude this concluding discussion just by thanking you for your brief and clear insights to your panel results, to possible strategies. We all know that we, even if we if we had been very, very diligent, could not have followed all the panels because many of them were parallel. So thank you for the summary, and thank you for sticking to the time. Thank you. Thank you for attending this concluding discussion. Now, I pass on the microphone to my colleague, Professor Lange, who will have a concluding statement himself with regard to his panel, and then immediately lead to the next topic that is going to explain himself.
First, thank you so much, Professor Wieshaider. I think the most difficult task in organizing panels at this conference was yours, and we appreciate very, very much what you have done for you, what you have done for us. Thank you. Lots have been said about the own panel I was involved in, and I don't think I need to repeat it. What I would like to draw is one more conclusion. And for that conclusion, I would like to ask Alvin Rosenfeld if he's still with us. Alvin, are you here? No? Yes. I would like ask Alvin to come down. I would like to ask Catherine Chatterley to come down. Catherine? She's not here. Okay. Am I missing anybody from the executive? No, it's okay. It's okay. Now, my co-organizers and I are eternally grateful for all the work you have done here. A conference can mark a highlight in the best of cases. For me, this was a highlight of research. But one of the most important things when you begin research is to continue it. Now, for me, personally, and I have heard this from many others of you, what was new about our endeavor was the interdisciplinarity. I have learned so much from all of you, and I'm a greedy person. I'd like to continue learning. I've enjoyed so much working with all of you, and again, I'm a greedy person. I'd like to continue this enjoyment. Anti-Semitism studies, in my experience, seems to be something that's existing and not existing. There's people working on anti-Semitism studies in psychology, in sociology, in history. I don't need to continue the whole line. One of the big problems we encountered in organizing this was to find all of you, because we didn't know of each other. The next problem was to find people who are interested in working with us on the practical side. So what we like to suggest is two things, actually. One is my personal suggestion and conclusion from this conference. I think we all should go back to our own fields, to our own conferences, and bring the conversation we had here back into our own scholarly associations, whether that's the Society of Biblical Literature, Historians Society, whatever. Now, the other conclusion that a few colleagues and I myself have drawn on Tuesday evening is the suggestion to launch an international organization for anti-Semitism research. We have put together a suggestion for a first executive board of that society, and that was the reason why I looked for Catherine and Alvin. Anybody who's, I'm sorry, there's no way to do it not awkward. All of you who are part of that board, could you please stand up that people can recognize you? So that's the board we suggest, plus Alvin, plus Catherine Chatterley. Before I continue to speak, I'd like to ask Monica a favor. You know the person whom we would like to suggest to be the first president of that society best. We have had many conversations with him, but it was all on too short notice for him to be there. But his name is Yehuda Reinhardt, and as I said, you know him best. Could you say a few words?
But just 2 or 3 words, no more. Okay, so we think that Yehuda Reinhardt will be the perfect choice for our first president. He's a well-known scholar. He has done scientific research in Judaism, on anti-Semitism. He has led Brandeis University as one of the most efficient presidents in the United States. And right now he's the president of the Mandel Foundation, so he's familiar with all the very important things we would like to have in our society. Thank you.
The idea would be, if we find enough interest in this room to launch an international organization for anti-Semitism research, that you give us the mission to begin working, to draw up a constitution, to organize a next meeting, whether that's then called an end to anti-Semitism, we will see. Probably not. And at that next meeting, we can then have our first come together as an international research organization. You want to say something, Dina?
Okay. Thank you so much, Armin, for announcing this. But I guess it doesn't come as a shocking surprise to anyone. There have been 2 attempts to found such an association, and they've not worked out. So we are trying our luck for the 3rd time. And when saying that this is no surprise to anyone, it's because we feel the need to be connected, to be, to have interactive work, to know each other. And indeed, one of the incentives to found this organization was that while working on the program, we discovered so many people in the field that we didn't know before, and we certainly would love to have them all. You saw, now you know the president, the executive board. We are almost done deciding a place where this should be centered. It needs a center. We will be writing to all of you about it. And I would like to add, as we suggested in the board that we say, there will be a need for some guiding rules for an organization of scholars, of academics, but also people who do academic work outside academic institutes. It's not just people who are affiliated. I would like to emphasize that. Not people who are just affiliated to university colleges, etc., but who are doing academic recognized work outside these frameworks, because this is academic work as well. We'd like to draw some principles. And the first principle that we came up with was that those belonging to, that would like to belong and would like to be part of this endeavor, will recognize the need to adopt the working definition of anti-Semitism so that we have some common basis, that we agree on. It's just at the beginning. This creature doesn't yet have legs or certainly not a tail, and it has a head. But we wanted to share with you this feeling that the conference on such a magnitude cannot go unpunished. It has to have a continuation, either with the policies that Mark was speaking about, and every one of us try to, and all of you try to contribute to, and an organization that will carry on the work. If Armin is already thinking about a second conference, I first will go home and sleep a week, and then we'll see about another conference.
I just want to add one point, which is that those of us who worked on the organization here, we know that there is one person who did more than the rest of us, and we really have to offer our thanks to Armin for this unbelievable setup here. So I want to make that point. And I think that this idea of the society being a result of all this is just another one of the products that is going to come. I'm also going to suggest to Armin across the room here that you say 2 or 3 minutes about the publication ideas, so someone shouldn't mistakenly believe that the guidebook list of policies is the sole thing that should emerge from the conference.
And just in terms of while we were at thanks, Armin certainly deserves all our thanks as well, but I also want to thank Ari Musicant, who has been the guiding material force and support behind bringing everyone together and initiating the idea and really creating the framework for which we could all come together. So we'd like to acknowledge that as well.
Before we continue with saying thank you, I'd like to know from you, maybe we can just do this by way of acclamation or the lack of acclamation, if you are in favor of the launching of an international organization for anti-Semitism research. So all of you who are in favor of what we're suggesting, please let us know by lack or acclamation. So I have given already many words of thanks. Let me just do one more to all my co-organizers, to all of you, in particular again to Dr. Musikant, to all our speakers who have spoken and who will still speak. Thank you so much.